Hi friends, today is Wednesday, March 3rd, and with Reading with Principal Rabb-Patterson, we're continuing with 50 Amazing American Women Who Changed the World by Laurie, Calkhoven, illustrated by Patricia, Castelao. And today we are going to learn about Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, women's rights advocate. Fact file. Born November 12, 1815 in Johnstown, New York. Spouse Henry Stanton. Children Daniel, Henry, Garrett, Theodore, Margaret, Harriet, and Robert. Died October 26, 1902 in New York, New York. Elizabeth Cady was born in a world that thought boys were better than girls. When her brother died in 1826, she tried to cheer up her father by becoming more boyish. He allowed her to study subjects like Greek that were normally reserved for boys. But she could not replace her brother in his eyes. She studied in her father's law office and saw the problems women faced. They couldn't inherit property or sign contracts. Everything they had belonged to their fathers or their husbands. And perhaps most important, women couldn't vote. Elizabeth decided to do something to improve all the lives of women. In 1848, she brought women together in Seneca Falls, New York, to talk about the problems they faced. If women could vote, Elizabeth knew they could work to change the other laws. 3 years later, she teamed up with Susan B. Anthony, see page 15, to lead the fight for women's suffrage. In 1920, 18 years after Elizabeth's death, the 19th Amendment was passed, granting American women the right to vote. Seneca Falls Convention and the Declaration of Sentiments. In 1848, Elizabeth and her friend Lucretia Mott organized a convention in Seneca Falls, New York, to talk about women's rights. Elizabeth presented the Declaration of Sentiments, which she had written and modeled on the Declaration of Independence. It called for women to be treated equally in law and in society. The convention marked the beginning of the women's suffrage movement in the United States. Susan B. Anthony, women's rights advocate. Fact file. Born February 15, 1820, in Adams, Massachusetts. Spouse, never married. Children, none. Died March 13, 1906, in Rochester, New York. Like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony worked to end slavery. She was also involved in the temperance movement, an effort to ban alcohol. When she stood up to speak at a convention, she was told that women were not allowed to talk. That led her to become involved in the women's rights movement. Susan had been raised in a Quaker family. Their religion saw women as equal to men. When she became a teacher in New York, she learned that the male teachers were paid much more than female teachers. She asked for equal pay and lost her job. From the moment Susan met Elizabeth in 1851, they became a strong team. Elizabeth often wrote the speeches, while Susan, who was a better speaker, delivered them. She would babysit for Elizabeth's 7 children so that her friend had the time to write. Susan spent 30 years traveling around the country speaking up for women's rights. In her very last speech, she said, "Failure is impossible." She was right. Women earned the right to vote August 18, 1920, 14 years after her death. Under arrest, Susan was arrested after voting in a presidential election in 1872, casting her ballot for Ulysses S. Grant. At her trial, a judge found her guilty of voting illegally and fined her $100, which would be almost $2,000 today. And so these are women's rights advocate Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. We applaud and salute your efforts. Because of you, women can vote and have more rights. Thanks for reading with us today, friends. Have a good evening.